Thank you for coming to today's program. We're very honored today to have Ambassador Princeton Lyman with us, talking about Sudan and African issues in general. Our President, Heather Hodges, will be presenting him in details, but I learned about his nickname, Mr. Africa. So we do have Mr. Africa among us today, and it's honor and pleasure to have you here. It's going to be very informative program. For those of you who are new to the council events, I welcome you. I welcome all the young people here, the young faces. We love to see your generation joining the council and attending our series of programs and speakers. You will have very informative and engaging sessions. The council has been around for 90 years, and we do speakers programs. You have the list of the speakers who are upcoming in the next 3-4 months, and hope to see you there. We also sponsor the Model UN in schools and the International Visitors Program to Cleveland. You'll have a chance, if you join the council, to host some of these people, professionals coming from all over the world to Cleveland, 200, 300 of them. So you'll have a chance to host them and intermingle with them and get to learn about their countries and professions. Thank you for attending today and hope to see you again.
Good evening and welcome to the second in our series of talks this year entitled Global Issues for Cleveland's Global Citizens. Tonight, our speaker, Princeton Lyman, is a distinguished statesman, a career diplomat, an expert in African issues, and a proven successful negotiator. You have in your program a brief mention, a brief biography on him, and particularly there is noted his work as Special Envoy for Sudan, a position which he held from 2011 to 2012. And before that, he worked on Sudan's 2005 Comprehensive Peace Agreement. I'd just like to add a few more points that probably should have included in the program, which is that about his diplomatic career. In the 1980s, he was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of African Affairs. He was Ambassador to Nigeria and also Director of Refugee Programs. In the 1990s, he was Ambassador to South Africa and Assistant Secretary for International Organizations. Over the years, he has also worked extensively with and for the U.S. Agency for International Development. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and a PhD from Harvard University. This afternoon, I had the privilege of hearing Ambassador Lyman speak to some young people at Shaker High. And I know that tonight I'm going to hear a little bit more than he presented there. But I can only say that the title of his talk, which is Oil, Genocide, and Civil War, the Challenges of Bringing Peace to Sudan and South Sudan, is succinct and tells you a lot, but it only begins to scratch the surface. So we're very happy to have you here with us.
Let me get my notes out so I don't forget anything too badly. But listen, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Corey and the officers of the Cleveland Council of World Affairs, Maura McCarthy and others in the staff. Thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate that very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've had a wonderful day in Cleveland. We met with a large number, I would say, of high school students this morning, and then earlier a college group at the university. So thank you very much. You know, one of the things with the map, and I didn't bring my little laser thing, but let me just, for the map, say, you know, the one question is, why do we care about Sudan? You know, the Sudanese reminded me when I was stepping down from this job that I was the 5th U.S. envoy for Sudan and South Sudan, and my successor, of course, would be the 6th. And the question is, why did we do that? Why have this particular problem had so much attention from America? Well, part of it is geostrategic, and I just want to take a minute to, well, you can probably hear me. I just want you to see there's South Sudan. But originally, the country was the largest geographic country on the continent. And because a large part of the population is Arab and Muslim, it's also a bridge between the Middle East and Africa and beyond. And its location, touching Egypt, touching Libya, touching Ethiopia, Chad, is that the wars that have taken place in Sudan, and there have been a lot of them since independence, have impacted on all these countries. Refugees coming over, these countries getting involved, supporting one side or the other, ramifications for Egypt because the Nile goes through Sudan. And so it has become a very important geostrategic center for that part of Africa. The late Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi, who has lots of problems with Somalia and Eritrea, said Sudan is the biggest danger in his region of the world. That's one aspect of it. But, you know, the other aspects of it also touch on American internal domestic politics and constituencies. And Sudan is a very good case of how domestic factors and foreign policy factors come together, overlap at times. Why has there been so much tension within the United States? There are 3 special constituencies that over the years have become very much concerned with Sudan. One is the issue of religious freedom, because throughout the civil wars since independence, the 2 major civil wars between the North and the South and what is now South Sudan, it has been largely, and I'm you know, simplifying a little bit, but largely a war between a Muslim North and Arab Muslim North and a Christian African or animist South, and attempts to impose Sharia law on the people of the South, which was, among other reasons, the cause for the wars, generated in the United States, particularly among the active Christian community, that this was a major example of religious freedom being challenged, and that the United States should do something about it. And that particular constituency was very close to George W. Bush and had an impact on it. But there was another constituency coming, if you will, from the other part of the other part of the American political spectrum, the Black Caucus. Because the Black Caucus in Congress was concerned because there were reports of slavery actually taking place. There's people in the North enslaving people in the South. And for the Black Caucus, this was, you know, my gosh, in the 20th century, we're still seeing slavery. So you had that, and then a third constituency. Because most of the 2 biggest wars in Sudan since its history in the independence have been these North-South wars, huge wars. But in 2003, in the western part of Sudan itself, a rebellion broke out in the area known as Darfur. And the government's reaction to that rebellion, it's not a style they hadn't used before, but in this particular case, the funding of Arab militias who swept through the populations from which the rebellion had arisen, burning down villages, killing, raping people. 300,000 people died just in that civil war, that civil strife. 2 million people displaced. And it happened just as people in the United States were looking back 10 years later at the Rwanda genocide and saying, never again. Why did we let it happen? And we can't let it happen again. And there were a lot of conferences going on in the United States. And just as all this is going on, Darfur explodes in this way. And people say, wait a minute, here it is again, and what are we going to do about it? And George W. Bush had written on the side of a memo in his office about Rwanda, not on my watch. So you had three very important American constituencies in the public and the Congress saying to the administration, this war is important to us. Now you had another element. You had a terrorism element. Sudan, after this government, the current government came to power in 1989, had invited in Osama bin Laden and a number of other very extreme groups. They later sent Osama bin Laden back out to Afghanistan, not terribly helpful in the long run. But that led to the United States putting Sudan on what's called the list of state sponsors of international terrorism, which has all kinds of sanctions associated with it. So you had all these things coming together. And then the terrible humanitarian implications of the war. Now, I've just gone over glibly the wars. Here is a country that became independent in 1956 and has never to this day solved the question of how do you govern a very diverse population. And because the political system, even under various regimes, was dominated by nilotic groups around Khartoum, the rest of the country, the rest of the groups, had never fully participated in Sudan. And the question is, how do you define Sudan? Is it an Arab Muslim country? Is it a diverse country, a multi-religious community? And the South, being, as I said, largely an African population, non-Muslim population for the large part, found this condition unbearable. And it was also marginalized. And you had two North-South civil wars. One came to an end, and there was a promise of autonomy for the South, etc., but it didn't last. And then you had another one that lasted up until the year 2005. And that one, the second one alone, led to 2 million people dying and 4 million people displaced, with refugees in many directions, people suffering. Many of you have heard about the Lost Boys as an example of people so displaced from their homes and searching desperately for a way to survive, basically. Now, what's the U.S. role in all this? Oh, I have to mention one other factor, because nothing gets simple in Sudan. Because in the 70s, oil was discovered in Sudan. And wouldn't you know, the oil is right here. So most of the oil is in the south, but it was a source of great wealth for the country as a whole, and all the export facilities run north. So that exacerbated the tension between North and South, because the idea of South secession with 70% of the oil made the war all the more difficult. How did that second war get resolved? How did we get to what's called the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in 2005? Well, all these issues came together to put a lot of pressure on these parties, and the war had exhausted the country. And an international effort, led in large part by the neighboring African states and by Kenya in particular, but assisted by the international community, came up to a peace agreement in 2005. And the first U.S. envoy for this purpose, the former Senator Jack Danforth, played a major role in helping bring about that agreement. What it provided for was that for 6 years there would be a government of national unity. And that would test whether it was possible to reconcile these things and create a united Sudan. At the end of that period, in 2011, South Sudan would have the right to a referendum to decide whether they wanted to stay in Sudan or become independent. As we got closer to 2011, when that referendum was to take place, people began to worry that Khartoum would not let it happen. After all, losing 70% of their oil, losing a big chunk of their population, and all the rest. And that's where some of the diplomacy that I'd like to describe and allude to, and we can talk about more later. How does diplomacy work in this situation? What do you do in a situation like this? Well, one thing was to bring much more international attention and pressure to the importance of this referendum. And in September of 2010, Ban Ki-moon said, I'm going to hold a meeting in New York during the General Assembly on Sudan. Well, people assumed it would be at the foreign minister level. President Obama said, I'm going. Well, they said the American president's going, so 20, 30 other heads of state from Latin America, Asia, everywhere, all came to the meeting on Sudan. And you had the Sudanese vice presidents from both sides. And one head of state after another got up and said, you guys have to go through with this. This is the international community telling you, you must do this now. And that was repeated in forum after forum. But the second thing we had to do was make the referendum work. To be perfectly honest, Khartoum, the government in Khartoum, was not making it easy to hold the referendum. They had appointed a chairman who was 90 years old, a wonderful constitutional scholar, but they were giving him no support. And he was harassed and surrounded, and you know, how can I do this? He didn't have money, he didn't have staff, he didn't have office space, etc. We had to make that work. I spent hours and hours with him. We became very, very good friends. But more than that, our USAID program brought experts in, through NDI, IRI, you know, all these organizations, IFES, etc., to do a tremendous amount of the extensive technical work, to all the laws, all the press relations, all the things, get it to work and put it before the chairman to get it done. And then when the money was not being provided by Khartoum, we went to the South Sudanese and we said, well, you pay for it, because you need this referendum, and if they're not going to give you the money, don't let it pass, because the money wasn't there. All these things came together and a lot of political pressure that only in December 2010, in my view, only in 2010 in December did Khartoum say, I guess we're going to do it. I guess we're going to let it happen. And then the referendum came off, and it was extraordinarily well run. And over 95% of South Sudanese voted for secession, for independence. And 6 months later, according to the agreement, South Sudan became independent and came free. Now, you would think the problem is over. I wish it had been over.